Ever heard of a race car driver who could win even with a broken car? That was Jim Clark, a Scottish farmer's son who defied the odds to become a racing icon. But his story doesn't end at the finish line. He died in the most tragic manner ever, and you have to know about it. James Clark was born on the 4th of March, 1936, at Kilmany House Farm, Fife, where by extraordinary chance, he was the only boy in a family of 5 children, having 4 elder sisters. In 1942, the family moved to Edington Mains Farm near Berwickshire, in the Borders. Educated first at the village school in Kilmany, and then in the small village of Chirnside. He transferred at 12 to Clifton Hall, a preparatory school on the outskirts of Edinburgh. He was there for 3 years, then attended the boarding school, Loretto, near Edinburgh, on the Firth of Forth in East Lothian. Going entirely against his parents' wishes, Clark began to race in local road rallies and hill climbing events at the wheel of his own Sunbeam Talbot. He created an instant impression. On June 16, 1956, he took part in his first ever event, driving a DKW Sonderklasse at Crime in Scotland. Even so, by 1958, Clark was driving for Border Reivers in local events. The team manager was Ian Scott Watson, and he drove Jaguar D-types and Porsches in national event races, notching 18 victories. It was sheer talent and desire on his part that moved him so quickly through the ranks of motor racing. On Boxing Day of 1958, Clark raced against the man who ultimately would launch him to stardom. Driving a Lotus Elite, he finished second to Colin Chapman in a 10-lap Grand Touring race at Brands Hatch. Clark won the first race for the newly introduced FJ at Goodwood in front of John Surtees and Trevor Taylor in March 1960. Clark had made an FJ appearance in a one-off race on Boxing Day, 1959, at Brands Hatch in a Gemini B MC for Graham Warner of the Checkered Flag Garage, Chiswick. Jim Clark in Formula One began at Zandvoort in 1960, June 6, under the colors of Lotus. The team had lost John Surtees to the Isle of Man TT Series, so Clark was called in to complement the lineup with Innes Ireland and Alan Stacey. He retired from the race when just 20 of 70 laps from the checkered flag due to a final drive failure. But a tragedy almost ended Clark's career, if he had been prosecuted, that is. Clark's second race had come at the 1960 Belgian Grand Prix, one of the most fearsome and fastest of circuits on the calendar, Spa-Francorchamps. Here, Clark learned the harsh realities of the profession of racing. During the course of that race, there were 2 fatal accidents, one with driver Chris Bristow and the other involving Alan Stacey. Clark comprised a result of 5th place and scored his first points. He concluded with, "I was driving scared stiff pretty much all through the race." One of the shattering tragedies in F1 history hit when, in 1961, on the 10th of September, Clark was involved in the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. Wolfgang von Tripp's Ferrari collided with Clark's Lotus. Von Tripp's car was in the air and threw itself against a barrier that, in turn, killed Von Tripp's as well as 15 spectators. Clark was investigated concerning his car and himself and was officially accused of manslaughter, but the charges were dropped. For all the prodigious successes in Jim Clark's career, in the background, there was always that touch of tragedy. His cherished world should have been a dangerous place. Something sinister was looming over the horizon, courses all set, ready to change the face of racing history and the living existence of Clark forever. The world of racing itself is suspended in midair in expectation. Then, in 1963, Jim Clark went on to win his first Drivers' World Championship in the revolutionary car, the Lotus 25. In grand style, he won 7 of the 10 races, giving the Lotus Works team the Constructors' Championship for the first time. During that same summer, Clark entered the great show that is the Indianapolis 500. He finished second behind Parnelli Jones in the event against America's Best and took home the rookie title of the Indianapolis 500, the Rookie of the Year. It was then that his actual career began, and it was also the start of Clark's ongoing story of success in international racing. That is the season. It was white hot in excitement, as Clark's talent and resolve burned a bright trail, exciting fans and fellow racers. What lay in store for this rising young star? The world held its breath. Jim Clark had something to prove as he raced ferocious speeds on the oval track to the seasoned Indy 500 veterans. Now, who Clark was strapped into may be legendary. A specially constructed Lotus roaring with near 500 horsepower. But that ingenious distinction didn't earn favor from the Indy officials impressed by European experiences either. It made this rookie from across the pond prove himself with a little driving test before entering the race. The big day arrived. Off shot the European rookie from the front row, and what a spectacular scene it was. Fighting against the country's top oval racers, Clark did not just compete, but conquered. He clinched the win with a lead of slightly over 2 minutes. The current record, 242.5 km per hour, being the first European to win since 1916. What made Clark such a phenomenon behind the wheel? How was it that he could win at anything? Jimmy was natural. He drove with his instincts almost without thought. He didn't know why he went the way he did. He just did. With the 1965 season approaching, Jim Clark had his eyes on one final piece of silverware, the World Formula One title. Having already achieved both Formula 2 championship wins, the Tasman Series, and indeed the Indy 500, Clark was now faced with driving a very slightly modified Lotus 25, the same car he was driving when he won the World Championship 2 years previously, against legends like Jack Brabham, Graham Hill, and this time, the reigning champion, John Surtees. At the South African opener, Clark surprised all by taking victory over the field by half a minute. Clark and Lotus demonstrated that they could learn to do a range of different things in 1967, 1 year after they had run 3 other cars with 3 different engines in 1966. The bad start to their year continued, as their Lotus 43 had a disastrous showing in the South African Grand Prix. A Lotus 33, being an old machine, comes out of the shed to participate in the Monaco Grand Prix. Clark retires following suspension failures. Here is a turning point that arrived in the form of the legendary Lotus-Ford-Cosworth partnership. The Lotus 49, with the legendary Ford-Cosworth DFV engine, won its race debut at the 1967 Dutch Grand Prix in the hands of Clark. He continued winning at British, United States, and Mexican Grand Prix in 1967, and then in the 1968 South African Grand Prix. At the same time, Clark would lord it over the Tasman Series for the Works Lotus team, taking back-to-back titles in 1965, 67, and 68. He amassed 14 wins, unmatched to this day in the series, one of which was the spectacular 1968 Australian Grand Prix at Sandown International Raceway, where Clark edged out Chris Amon's Ferrari by 0.1s, the margin in the event's history. Yet, as Clark's career ascended to more giddy heights, fate had another road in mind. Something was on the horizon, something unexpected and tragic that would change the racing world. In the details of the event that would shock the motorsport category, leaving fans and fellow drivers in complete disbelief, read on. What happened next would become a watershed event in the history of racing, a story that still oozes sensations of thrill and mystery for the sport's most legendary figure. On April 7, 1968, the world of tarmac was shocked by the sudden death of Jim Clark at the Hockenheimring in West Germany. Due to a break in the 1968 F1 season, Clark was forced to participate in the Deutschland Trophy, a Formula 2 race, since he had a contractual obligation to Firestone. Even if it was called a minor race, it had all the best drivers and teams of the era. Clark's Lotus 48 left the course suddenly on the 5th lap of the first heat and careered off into the trees, causing fatal injury. Investigators have attributed this to a slowly deflating rear tire, although it was never precisely known. That had a significant bearing on the racing world. Other top drivers were among his near friends who also turned out for him. Colin Chapman, the founder of Lotus, was devastated, referring to Clark as his best friend. His teammate, Graham Hill, 889, however, managed to lift the mood by winning the same 1968 F1 Drivers' Championship and dedicated it to Clark. Now, a memorial stands at Hockenheim in honor of Clark. The crash scene is under the forest now. The section of the track had to be re-sown, wrote off the collision as either it was a mechanical failure or tire failure. Clark's ability and skill were so tight that many believe him having been unable to put a foot. As Andrew Marriott from Motorsport said of Clark's attempt, "You don't class Jimmy Clark doing things like that." Jim Clark wasn't just a driver, he was a legend. It didn't matter in which car or on which track. His inborn talent, pinpoint control, and never-give-up spirit kept him the one to clash with. His legacy? Inspiration for racers and fans, literally making race driving an art. For more stories like this on Legends of F1, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below.